Welcome to our viewers. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Migrate and Manage Media Assets with EcoDigital, Diva, and Cloudian. Joining us today are Jeff Tognetti, CTO at EcoDigital, and David Phillips, Principal Architect at Cloudian. Welcome, Jeff and David. With that, I'll hand it over to David.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk with you, Jeff, today. So, we are hosting this webinar together as partners, technology partners, alliance partners. But I have a personal history, with Diva and Diva systems. Previous to joining Cloudian, I was manager of an engineering team at NBC Universal, and during my time there, I had several Diva systems that I was managing. And just as a kind of level set, I think my view at the time and still today of Diva as a content storage management system is that this was a system that the major broadcasters, enterprises really trusted to store and manage like all of their crown jewels of their libraries and all of their content. So you'd have large enterprise broadcasters that all of the assets stored on the Diva literally represented millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And that includes also studio studio operations as well, kind of storing feature film and elements and all that. So its place in the market really was like, here's a best of breed solution that is a trusted, reliable repository for all of your content, and such a business critical and revenue critical role. That's why people kind of invested in Diva. So just as a stepping into intros, I'm David Phillips, Principal Architect at Cloudian. So I work with all the M&E customers that we have and kind of designing solutions of how to integrate Cloudian object storage into their workflows. And then as I said, I'm excited to be talking with Jeff Tognetti today, who's CTO of EcoDigital. So Jeff, welcome.
Thanks very much, David. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the great intro. And as David said, Jeff Tognetti, CTO of EcoDigital, formerly also of Front Porch, the predecessor to EcoDigital, who became part of Oracle, as many of our viewers probably know. In 2014, I was also part of Oracle for 5 years, and then, of course, joined EcoDigital afterwards. So very excited to be here, excited to have this talk.
Excellent. Yeah, so just to kind of, for viewers, audience, people in the audience who might be familiar with EcoDigital Diva, but less familiar with Cloudian, just to kind of set the stage here. What is Cloudian? Cloudian HyperStore is our company name. HyperStore is our flagship object storage platform. So this is an on-prem object storage platform, software-defined storage platform that has really, gained a lot of interest and traction in the media and entertainment market as companies look to, as they, if they find themselves at the crossroads from the kind of legacy tape-based archive, and they're looking to gain the kind of speed, agility, online presence and accessibility that object storage provides. So just wanted to kind of level set and get that out of the way. So, Jeff, I think, I kind of mentioned, my personal history, and that was, obviously, as you kind of mentioned, that was during the previous ownership under Oracle. And, it was, again, like the focus at that time was around, content storage management, meaning like there's content coming from, different media asset management systems, different workflow automation systems that need to be stored. And Diva was taking care of storing that taking care of inventorying all of the tape media that was in a kind of typically large tape library, taking care of all of the, queuing up, potentially a large amount of jobs for archiving and restoring, managing all of the traffic and everything like that. Very often could be very sophisticated workflows. So, now in current, ownership under EcoDigital, kind of now independent, probably a little bit more agnostic about, the partners that you work with, and even the, storage targets that, that you're being asked to kind of interface with. I thought you might, be helpful to kind of take it, take us through the kind of current status of EcoDigital Diva, and some of the changes that have come in recent months.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you noted, Diva, both in the past and still today, has always had a place in terms of managing the the archive and the distribution of content. So if you think of that layer of where MAMs and other applications sit, that kind of ingest and cataloging and tagging and sometimes watermarking and all the traditional MAM kind of things that go on, and then from there going into the distribution and archiving and storage management layer. That's where Diva has sat, really where the product kind of evolved and came from, and still sits today. That's of course a role we still fill for many customers today and do successfully, and we're partnered with many MAM vendors to do so. But where we've been evolving and where we see the industry has been evolving over the years has been into really a much more flexible footprint. And to take it a little bit at a macro level so you understand what's been driving us and the changes that we've been making. I think just to state the obvious, OTT, you look at the original players like the Netflixes and the Hulus of the world, and now everyone's, all the big players have jumped in it, has obviously transformed the industry. It's transformed every aspect of it, for both the consumption of content to the production of content. And it's really moved things rapidly into a much more modular, what I like to call, because I'm a software developer, I call it more of a loosely coupled model of using and putting together services and consuming services, best of breed services as you need them, and basically building workflows, rather moving kind of away from kind of the more static and more rigidly built workflows of the past. And you see that, like, for example, in like networking, how the industry has been really shifting rapidly from the older kind of, baseband, SDI driven, networking to, everyone's really moving into, or has already moved in many cases, to IP. You see the production process evolving with that. So while in a lot of cases, you still have, kind of these processes in place where you have, maybe it's your MAM, or maybe it's something that, some other form of asset management that's not a MAM, but has some of those similar functions, or some other automation system. And then you have that storage layer that we manage underneath it. It's really evolved for us, and where we've been going is to helping our customers be more flexible and adaptable. And mobile is really the word I like to use, mobility. To your point that you made, one of the things we've done since moving outside of Oracle and becoming independent again is really reaffirmed our commitment to adopting other forms of storage and adopting other partners. Such as yourselves, of course, being a great example, because that's where our customers want to be. Our job, I see our job as really providing that flexible layer for storage. Not just simply managing like a large kind of monolithic, archive, backed primarily by tape, but really managing that kind of footprint. And that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, as monolithic. There's still a lot of monolithic systems that are kind of out there, and there's still monolithic workflows. But if you look at where the industry is moving and where cloud is moving, and I think we're going to talk a lot about hybrid coming up. But I see that as, being able to adapt into that world and into that market is very important for a lot of media companies. It's been a big part of what we've been doing and where we've been shifting Diva. We just released version 8 in June. We've had great uptake with it. It's actually been the fastest uptake of any of the major releases we've had. It's also been the biggest release we've had in many years.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's been driven by new things we've added, such as analytics and native file and folder capability, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I'm very excited about where we're headed and where the industry's headed.
Right. And then, I think, from our side, that all that future that you're talking about, which again is probably driven by, customer industry demand. One of the key parts about, Cloudian's partnership with EcoDigital is that we can leverage actually your past, in that you are so well supported and integrated in all of those kind of enterprise MAMs, especially in the broadcast space. It's like you have, be it an Avid Interplay, or an Avid Media Central, all of, a Delete or something like that. All of these kind of like real, heavy enterprise systems long ago standardized, and that's a well-oiled, connection and workflow to, I'm going to hand off, assets for, archive, restore. Now it's really just more about data movement. Okay, I need to clear space off of my tier 1 production storage, and Diva is going to handle that. So do a Diva API call. So, the benefit from Cloudian side is that a customer that already has, that an Avid ecosystem and has a Diva infrastructure can drop in, Cloudian object storage behind that with, with no interruption to the workflow. There's no retooling or anything like that. And that's, we get to kind of leverage all of that groundwork that you've done over the past years, which, and just, I talk to a lot of people, and just to kind of reinforce and the point, colleagues that I talk to, and even kind of higher level executives I talk to, they might be familiar with like Avid, an Avid, MAM and PAM solutions, but they're like, okay, well, what is Diva doing in that? And it's just as you describe. It's like the content storage management that a lot of those media asset management systems, they don't really want to take on that role of, writing things to tape, much less writing, instances of an asset to, tape plus private cloud plus to public cloud, and we'll kind of get into those kind of like multiple layers and tiers. But, from an Avid or, like from a broadcast standpoint, they're just like, I'm handing this off, and then somebody else and goes and takes care of making multiple copies and storing that securely in multiple places and even multiple geos, so.
Yeah, I used to get that a lot. Not so much anymore, but it's like, my MAM connects to, Amazon or, whoever now, so, why wouldn't we just use that? But the managing the data it's a living process. In terms of storage policies, in terms of moving it around, it's not static at all. It's not, okay, here's your content bucket or your storage destination, and we put it there, and okay, it's safe there, and now we're done. It's a constant moving target. To your point, there's new instances being created of that object. That object is being transformed. We're moving it constantly between, because of where we sit at that data layer, we're often the most efficient place, for example, to send stuff out to transcoders. We partner with the number of transcoders. We're very good partners with Telestream, for example, and Telestream Vantage. We're very widely used by a lot of our customer base. We're integrated tightly with their API for content transformation right out of the archive and back. So there's a constant cycle of policies that Diva is running. So it's not just about acting as like kind of a file pointer of, okay, this thing is located on this tape that's located on this shelf. It's a living, evolving process. And you're right. It's not a core competency of asset management or automation systems, and you don't really want it to be, because I think you really need things to be, like I was speaking about. You want things to be more modular. To your point, you don't want to have to come in and try to change, like an ingest process if you want to introduce like your storage, for example. It's a lot easier if you have a layer kind of managing and directing that, things like we're doing now. You can just plug it right in, and we've had examples where we've done exactly that.
Yeah, exactly. And so as we're going to kind of talk about the aspects of migration a little bit later, but I wanted to kind of talk to you about this. We've mentioned several times about hybrid systems, right? And I think in the current climate, I've talked to many people and heard multiple anecdotes about the data centers locked down. The only person who has badge access is maybe CTO level, and they're being asked to go in. It's like, hey, can you like swap out a tape set, or the mechanical robot is stuck, and we need to get a support engineer there. And it's really highlighted for these organizations that it's like, wait a minute, the kind of very physical media aspect, the very mechanical nature of tape libraries has really kind of highlighted that, hey, in this, current kind of lockdown scenario, we can't get in there to address mechanical, physical media issues. We actually really need, in order for business continuity, we need something that's remotely accessible, remotely, manageable, and you can administrate it remotely. And it's kind of really driven the kind of drive towards object storage and cloud solutions. Do you see that, like that, so that's been kind of expedient, and driven by the urgency of, the current climate. Do you see that as like a temporary phase, or do you see that like hybrid is really where that's almost the kind of the future state that things are moving towards?
It's an interesting question. So a lot of times when I have, so you brought up an interesting part, because one part of what you described is what I call there's the one piece of cloud. When people talk about cloud, what they're really describing is someone else's IT problem, right?
Yeah.
So that's the one phase of it, and there can be value to doing that. It's typically a monetary thing, and you run the numbers and you say, okay, if I'm outsourcing this, I move this to OpEx instead of CapEx, et cetera, et cetera. And now if a hard drive breaks, somebody else gets the call at 3 a.m. and so on. But I think if you do that, but you're still using the same monolithic systems and monolithic processes, and you're just thinking about lifting and shifting those over. I think what I've seen is companies and media companies in particular don't have a lot of success in that, or they look at that and they can see even before they try, they're not going to have a lot of success in that. So the other part of that is looking at okay, how can we be more flexible? And that's really where I think that the hybrid piece comes in that we talk about. When I hear hybrid some of the time as well, a lot, actually quite a bit of the time in conversations, I almost hear the undertone of it's a transitory state, meaning, we're here, like you're talking about, well, we're here at this kind of the way we've been, and there's this future state where it's all magical and somebody else is running all this IT for us.
Right.
And in the middle right now, we've kind of got this hybrid thing, and this is just a phase we have to get through. But I think in reality, what we're actually seeing in the field is it's not a transitory state at all. I think it is the state. It's the end state. And what I mean by that is it's not just a matter of moving your IT and your IT and your spend. It's also about the adaptation of your process as companies. So what we said, going back to what I was talking about earlier with OTT, one of the first adoptions, of course, was the delivery aspect, for OTT, when Netflix suddenly became this conduit of just buying all this content, right? Everyone scrambled to say, yeah, sure, we'll give it to you any way you want the process to be. We're going to get delivered to you like that because you're buying it, right? So those processes changed very, very quickly and became very adaptable because Netflix, and there were others, obviously, I'm just picking them on purpose because that's what they were looking for. But that process has permeated throughout the entire production process, even all the way down to, longer term storage and big archive. Now we're at these larger sets of media just because of, the volume of data that you're managing and, the kind of the technology refresh cycles that happen. It takes a little longer for these things to be adapted. But what I'm seeing certainly is that same rate of adaptation of saying, we're not just talking about taking these same monolithic things and moving them into the cloud and outsourcing our IT. We're actually looking at how do we build a new set of processes where we can consume services as we need them. We can pick best of breed technologies to combine them. And these we can scale independently when we need. And by the way, this, the distinction between cloud, a lot of people, again, when they say cloud, they think, they think in terms of like public cloud, like the big players. But I'm talking about the model I'm talking about is equally well, on-prem or off. That's how I distinguish it as on-prem or off. And I know, you guys are kind of the standard bearers for that kind of paradigm. Go ahead.
Right. No, I think, kind of amplifying what you're saying. I think of hybrid as like using the best, infrastructure, if you just in broadest terms for the right role, So, public cloud is perfect for, massive scale, and the elastic, compute and serving out, that it can provide. And I think the OTT example is perfect, when you're talking about content and content storage, because all of these OTT portals may have, their licensing agreement, are for these short periods, right? And so the amount that they're actually streaming out on their portal at any given time is a small section of what all of the content that they have stored, and because they may renew those rights, in the future and kind of stream those out. There's a programming aspect, curating aspect, and licensing aspect to it, but they would hardly ever want to store any more, terabytes, up in the public cloud than they had to at any given time. And back to kind of what you were saying before about this like process of moving from the legacy, let's call it the kind of legacy monolithic infrastructure to something more like a hybrid infrastructure that's more modular and dynamic. There's also the aspect of like, when you talk about multiple petabytes, if not tens of petabytes, that's not something you just casually lift and shift to the public cloud. Number one, just the bandwidth that it requires, the time it requires, and and the cost that it would represent, unless there is some compelling reason to do it. And so, what we often kind of talk in terms at Cloudian about like data gravity, about it's all when you talk about multi-petabyte libraries.
It's the term I love, by the way.
They're just like heavy, and they have like an inertia. They don't like to move around. And if all of your connection to the public cloud is like a 10 gig, direct connect, and oftentimes in the best scenarios, you're not just going to point that your kind of your Diva and say, okay, migrate it to the public cloud, without some really compelling business reason to do so.
But you could, and we have clients who do look at it and say, look, this kind of I love data gravity, but I know I told you that before, but it's always one of my favorite terms. What you look when we talk about to put some context behind it, when we talk about being flexible and like kind of that mobility, you talk about the customer who has their center of gravity for their data is located on-prem, and maybe there are better solutions you can do there. There's things between tape and object storage, and we see a lot of interest, certainly, in object storage. Tape, I think this is maybe a longer discussion we could have later. Tape certainly still has a place, but there's certainly a good movement with object storage. But to your point, you don't simply take 50 or 60 or 70 petabytes, which is not uncommon at all at size for any of the customers that we work with, and move that to a single public vendor. But what you do look at is you say from a distribution standpoint, particularly OTT is concerned, is that is the kind of system you want to distribute that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's about building that hybrid system that can take it, and then looking and leaning at what parts of the process do you want to move up, off-prem versus what do you want to keep on-prem? Do you want to do more of your QA? When you pull it out of the archive, do you want more of your QA to be off-prem? Do you want that to scale? Maybe you're transcoding. Do you want to put that, et cetera? To your point, and how do you control that flow? And so that's, that's certainly a lot of what we've been doing. A lot of the work we've been doing around Diva has just been around, again, enabling that kind of flexibility, in our workflows for customers, because that's what we're seeing our customers do.
Yeah, and one thing I'm really excited to see with the new version is when you talk about flexibility and mobility, your support for native file and folder.
Yeah, long time coming.
It is a huge, that really enables so much, really kind of more open workflows, right? So that, being able to, and it's been a kind of a core focus of our platform is support for native S3 objects, right? And native S3 object metadata. And that when we tier data, if a customer chooses to tier data to a major public cloud vendor, that those are tiered as native objects and they're not proprietized, and you don't have to unwrap them and place them onto Blocker file storage to access them. So that's that kind of, it's really exciting to kind of see EcoDigital embrace that kind of target agnostic mindset.
Yeah, that's really us, me and the team. Who's just, my development team is really, most of whom, almost all of them have been with me since the beginning. Some of them have been with Front Porch since the beginning. The best in the world have just done an outstanding job, and just we looked at that and said, we can't really evolve and call ourselves flexible if we're not adopting these kind of standards as well. And so that's really what drove that. And so, and that's really, a lot of the interest around V8 has been around that kind of capability. As you see, when you're dealing with data tape, and you have, you're dealing with archive formats and containers and things like that, it's a little bit of a different paradigm. But certainly when you're dealing with object storage, you can't have a format, even though we're using open standards, you can't really have a format that only the Diva system is reading. It just doesn't work. So we knew that was a change we had to make, and it's done. So we're happy that's out.
Yeah. So, so as we're kind of describing, Diva's role as this really, abstraction layer over all of the content, that an enterprise, all the valuable content is stored that an enterprise, maintains. So Diva's really kind of at that kind of, junction where it can really watch all of these data flows, come and go back. People ask for restores back from the archive, wherever those instances may be, for be it breaking news, programming, things like that. So you really kind of that traffic cop, for lack of a better word. So you really see the traffic coming and going. Which I think has been a big focus of this new platform, right? Is kind of really getting some real rich analytics on all of the content and the content flows, and being able to kind of get reports to be actionable on that data.
Yeah, that's been driven a lot by our clients. It's something, right out of the gate, as soon as we became independent from Oracle, I flew around. I spent more time in planes before the pandemic that frankly I care to think about. But it was a great set of meetings. I got to sit down with virtually everyone around the world, and one of the things that came loud and clear was better analytics, better reporting. And to your point, there's two sets of that. One was, you're connected to everything. So give me a better set of data so I can make better decisions about what's going on. What do my usage patterns look like? Right now I got to pull this data from all these separate systems. I'd rather just pull it from you. But the other part of that we started noticing, and what I started getting deeper into was kind of the dark data problem. If you think, and I'm not bagging on MEMS or whatever, but if you think about like the MEMS, a lot of times during the ingest process, they'll handle the initial cataloging and they'll do tagging and the watermarking and other kinds of things. But what you find out over time is as archives build up, a bunch of things happen. One is a lot of that content, some of it doesn't pass through a MEM, right? Because for whatever reason, or it passed through a different MEM because they changed vendors, or the MEM, they reconfigured the MEM at some point. And so you end up with varying levels of metadata or no metadata at all, and in your archive that builds up over time. And so what you find is there's a growing problem of a lack of deep awareness of what's going on with the content. And so another part of what we look at is, well, how do you solve that problem for customers? Because I sometimes hear, well, MEMS do metadata collection and stuff like that, and they do, and we partner and work with them like that. But I'm talking about once it's past that, and you're dealing in the archive world, and you've got this large archive, how do you gain that additional level of intelligence? So one of the things we're doing is pulling deeper. Since we're moving and archiving content, and archiving and restoring it anyway, pulling additional levels of detail there to provide additional level of insight. We're not looking to replicate or we're not trying to be another MEM or replicate that data, but it's really more about providing that additional level of insight into content. And that's another thing that we've been hearing from the market.
Right, and I feel like that's really the direction things are going. That's becoming such an important. We're talking about when you talk about a hybrid infrastructure and all these different types and categories of storage,
right.
And even different financial models from CapEx to OpEx. The industry in this time of transformation and change is just really has this urgent need for analytics of data and analytics to make decisions. What's the total cost of ownership? For kind of back to the public cloud. Like here's our kind of crown jewel long-term archive. What's the total cost of ownership of storing that in the public cloud for 5 years, 50 years, and stuff like that versus storing it like on-prem on object or a combination of on-prem object and tape. So I do want to kind of one of the kind of topics where we want to focus today is on migrations. And I think so many customers that we talk to are they're coming to us because they are at this crossroads of they have a large legacy tape archive for different reasons, be it business agility, or they're tired of migrating tape formats. They're looking for a kind of evergreen forever home, for their content libraries. For different reasons, they're like at this crossroads between the legacy tape archive and their next generation archive. And it's a daunting process. I was on some calls recently where a large organization was describing that they were in a LTO migration, tape format migration, they were 3.5 years into it, and they had to pause it because of COVID, and they had to redirect all of those essentially their archival system resources towards restoring content for that people were asking for for COVID programming and stuff like that to kind of fill those programming holes. So they had to put their tape migration that was already 3.5 years old running on hold, and so it was going to be delayed even longer. I feel like that when I kind of introduced Diva as this flagship enterprise system, I feel like that's also what people really rely on Diva for, is that managed migration of that. Here's a very, kind of robust distributed system that can, on a, designed plan, manage this kind of background, or if it's urgent, foreground, wholesale migration, from formats, but also, now to new formats like object storage.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's bread and butter for what we do. I mean, traditionally, I mean, and still today, if you're on LTO6, you want to go to LTO8. Now that LTO8 has settled their differences, so to speak. Certainly those, that's something we do all the time. There are migrations, from tape to object storage. I mean, migration in our world really too is a living thing. It's interesting. Some of the tape migrations, they could take long. We've worked with customers who've outsourced it, and that's something that's becoming a little more popular. And I think now with the pandemic, becoming something people are considering more as well. Particularly if you've got secondary or tertiary copies of tapes that you can use, kind of outsourcing some of that.
Yeah.
We've worked with customers who are doing that, and in Diva, we work with companies that do that to help enable that with Diva. So that helps. But it's, I think of migration as really a part of the whole flexibility argument, because it's all about the flow of managing that data. Not just in terms of migrating it, meaning it was in one state and now it's in another state, but just kind of maintaining the two. A classic example would be we work with you. We've got a Cloudian HyperStore. We've got object storage here. That's the copy that people are working for and hitting first, but they're still maintaining that one copy back on tape instead of 2 or maybe 3, or they're doing all 3. They're doing the 3-2-1 backup, and they're using us to put something in S3, and they're using you, and they've got something on an LTO drive somewhere. And that's part, and we use migration, even though it's not what you would traditionally think of a migration in terms of moving from one to another. It's still really a migration workflow that we're doing with that. But in terms of large scale migrations, that's, I mean, I couldn't even keep count in my head how many petabytes of data we've moved from different technology platforms, and we've done cloud as well. We've done major migrations. The biggest one we've done a multi-petabyte migration from Europe to the US, from an on-premise system to a cloud system comes to mind. So it's still a core capability of our software that people rely on.
Yeah, and I think because it is such a daunting task to undertake, especially if you're talking about like news and sports organizations that their archive systems are essentially running 24/7. They if they cannot stop archiving because their primary storage will fill up, and they can't they have urgent breaking news or kind of deadline driven restores that they need to be making. So like their tape drives and their tape robotics are just working 24/7. There's no time to do a migration. What we've seen a lot of times is customers decide, okay, the best path forward is that we're going to stop archiving to tape, and all new archives are going to go to object, because we see this as our kind of like evergreen forever home for archives going forward. And then as things are requested from the archive, they're immediately tagged with value, number one, if people are requesting them, and and those simultaneously get routed to object storage as they're restored. So it becomes this kind of rolling living migration, which
exactly.
kind of like we're describing, which you still have to deal with tape formats kind of becoming end of support and all of that. But it's, there's no one size that fits all, and having, platforms that have the flexibility and really the scalability. And I think that's the other thing that distinguishes Diva, is being able to scale up to, I can have, say, like half a dozen actors, that are just doing migration, and the rest is dedicated to restores that from the library, and then there's another complement of actors that are driving new archives to object storage.
Yeah, we'll drop in, and we can set up different storage plans and rules to we can look at set terms of priorities. There's a bunch of different ways we attack the problems. Because you're right, it's but increasingly to your point, we see, what we see is a lot of times with the technology, now that the technology refresh is catching up, this is also becoming the time of, okay, let's rethink our workflow. Let's go to that modular workflow. And that I think is a part of it too. So like when they introduce, and they bring in cloud and they bring in object storage, they're not just saying, okay, we're going to, we've got Diva here and now we're plugging you in. But everything else is going to be the same. They're also talking to us, and I know talking to you as well, because we've been on these same engagements about, okay, what else should we be changing? The rest, in some cases, it's, our other parts of our organization are changing or have already changed. So what other capabilities do we need to be looking at? And that's usually where we start having these conversations about, okay, what specific surfaces can we adopt? I have one client specifically that uses, I think, 4, maybe even 5 now, different QA systems. And I mentioned that one because, and they use it for different things. One of them, they like the black frame detection on one of them. It's like the most weird things imaginable.
Yeah, sure.
And then, the other one they just kind of use for the same purpose. It's kind of like an A/B thing. And what's interesting about it is 10, 15 years ago, a conversation would have been with them about, okay, we need to consolidate. We've got too many vendors here. We need to go bug this one vendor we like the best and tell them you need to have the features for the other one because we're gonna single it down. And now we're seeing, kind of the opposite. We're seeing we're picking, we like the capabilities of these vendors and we're picking the services they do, and we have the ability to leverage those. And as long as we have the flexibility to route that content where it needs to be, we'll just use what we need to use. And if somebody else, some other division or department wants to use this other piece of QA, that's not the IT management nightmare that it used to be,
right.
In more of that tightly coupled monolithic system. So it's interesting seeing how workflows and media organizations have evolved with these processes.
Yeah, so I see a lot of people really trying to seize this window of opportunity.
Right.
Of, hey, we're touching these files, for the first time maybe in a while. Let's get some metadata enrichment and tagging on them. Let's kind of get some fine-grained analysis and things like that. Yep. So I really appreciate discussion today. It's a topic that I have a kind of deep background in, and so could talk all day. But I think Audrey, we have probably have a little bit of time for some questions. If there's any questions from the audience today. Correct.
This one's for David. It seems like all object storage is basically the same. What's different about Cloudian?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I have heard that more than once. That maybe it's kind of coming from this conception that LTO. What's the difference between Sony LTO tape and Fuji LTO tape, or something like that? It's just different color packages. But really, I think
Don't get them started.
Yeah, what distinguishes Cloudian object storage is number one, that we developed the product as a native implementation of the S3 API. So it's a completely, we consider it essentially. I think of it as AWS S3 on-prem in your data center. Why would you do such a thing? And it typically comes down to there's cost benefits, there's performance benefits because you're not limited to your ISP bandwidth. You have all of your bandwidth on your local network, and then it's behind your firewall, so you have complete security, control of the security profile. But I think the native S3 API really comes into play with partners like with EcoDigital Diva, because those advanced verbs supporting things like byte range, offsets, being able to, so that Diva can do like a partial file clip restore. From you have a multi-hour recording and the customer just wants to take 15 seconds. Diva can essentially snip that out of a large object and deliver just a small clip. That, and I think our design architecture that's designed for scale, where we have the same architectural design principles as AWS, where data centers and regions and multiple regions geo-distributed across a wide area network is I would say probably one of our kind of unique differentiators in the market.
Great, thank you, David. I think this next one is for Jeff. What combination of on-prem storage and cloud are you seeing around the industry for archiving?
It's interesting. It really, for archiving, it really kind of varies. So what I'm seeing from a lot of our clients is from a storage perspective. So there's a lot of adoption of cloud from our client base for services, for things like transcoding or moving into OTT or distributing even between different departments or different divisions of the company. But not a huge amount. We've got some clients who put archival data as from a DR strategy. And so we're seeing primarily that, and then we're seeing a lot who are using it from more of a distribution strategy. But if we're talking pure archiving, it's mostly right now being leveraged for DR. So it's a cold copy where someone's saying, instead of maybe maintaining, like that secondary, tertiary, tape copy or whatever, we're gonna put it up in the cloud. And I think a lot of that really is just driven by cost, because a lot of the archival tiers in the cloud, they could be they're good. They're good solutions and they're inexpensive, but they're really kind of driven by don't touch the data. They get kind of expensive once you start moving it. So that's what we're seeing, from our mix. And so we're still seeing a pretty rich mix in terms of, again, I just love that term, so I'm going to keep using it. The data gravity is still solidly on-prem. But certainly for distribution and in terms of leveraging services, there's a much heavier usage for off-prem, for what we would call cloud.
Great, thank you for that. Back over to David. Is Cloudian cost competitive with data tape storage for media archives?
Yeah, and that's probably such a common question that we've done. Kind of commissioned independent studies on, say, a total costs of operations, comparison between on-prem object storage and data tape. And, I think trying to have a shorter, simpler answer, than a multi-page report, for smaller, tape footprints where it's essentially the workflow is, a tape on the shelf, a kind of a tape drive, or a small library, and then tapes are kind of offline and put on the shelf. That is obviously a very cost-effective solution. When you talk about enterprise level solutions where it's like thousands of tape slots in a tape library, in other words, this represents, tens of petabytes of a long-term archive, and all of the infrastructure that is around that large tape archive, from the fiber channel fabric to you have to have some block or file storage for all of the archives and restores to be staged or land from a restore, to when you do a kind of true total cost of analysis, including all of the kind of mechanical upkeep and the kind of the engineering that is required for managing a very mechanical library archive system. We certainly make the case that commodity software-defined storage like Cloudian on commodity hardware, that's easy to maintain and remotely accessible, has both hard total cost of operation advantages over tape, and then there's all of the kind of softer qualifiers of your media is online and accessible all the time, and there's not this online offline kind of category where it just increases the speed and agility of your media operations. So, we like to also say that we're, at scale less expensive than public cloud over the long term, that 5-year, 10-year period. So that's a core focus of our business, is to try to really be cost effective against both data tape and the public cloud.
All right. Does Diva have integration with Route 6 Transcoder? Is there a possibility in the new roadmap?
Yes, we are partners with Route 6. And to the extent that new integrations, we're always we're always in a state of working with partners. We have a updated, much more elegant API for our REST API due in our next point release in just a couple months here. So we're currently working with our partner network on that. So, but the short answer is yes, Route 6 is a good partner of ours.
Okay, a couple more that just came through. Does Diva write in multi-thread format into cloud storage?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
It's an easy one.
Yeah. So multi-part upload, multi-part download,
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Another one for you again. Can Diva write directly into Aws S3 now? I thought it was limited to Oracle Cloud. Does Diva still use an Oracle database?
Oh, that's painful. I got heartburn now. Yes, yes, we absolutely support AWS now. I know that was for a long time. That was not the case. It is absolutely the case now, and has been since 7.7. So if you are a Diva user, Diva customer, and you're not on at least 7.7, now 8.0, that's where you want to be. We do natively support AWS. We do still use the Oracle database. That doesn't. We use the Oracle database at Front Porch. It's a great relational database. We are constantly in the process of evaluating technology, so we have no plans to simply stop using the Oracle database. We still have a good partnership with Oracle, and it's still fully supported. But longer term future roadmap, to give a peek at it, we will probably make things a little more agnostic and introduce the ability to use new databases. I don't have a specific timeline for that. But in the meantime, Oracle database is perfectly fine. It does exactly what we need it to do.
Great. I think there's one last question here I see.
Sure.
With a large existing LTFS-based archiving using LTO, can Diva V8 discover, index, and mitigate the stored content from existing LTO over to something like Cloudian HyperStore? Can content then be accessed directly from HyperStore, or is Diva required to access the content?
Yeah, so we could. So actually, with V8, yes. So we could always migrate it. So this talks about what I was talking about with native file and format earlier. What we brought up. So with version 8 and higher, which is in production now, which is released now and in production with several client sites, you can actually use the native file and format. So that's an option. So you can do a migration from tape, migrate it to Cloudian Object Store, and it'll appear in that native file and format on Object Store. Yes.
All right. Excellent. I think that concludes the questions for today. David, do you want to pull up the contact?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
okay, great. Awesome.
Yeah, really appreciate everybody joining today. Been a really stimulating, wide-ranging discussion. So I appreciate Jeff taking the time to talk today. And so for more information, you can email EcoDigital at sales@goecodigital.com, or their website, goecodigital.com, or email sales@cloudian.com for Cloudian inquiries. And our website is, Cloudian.com, where you can download a free trial of HyperStore as a VM OVA and try it out on your own in your own environment. So appreciate taking the time, Jeff. It's really great.
You as well.
Talking.
Yeah, thank you both.
So thanks, Audrey.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Have a good day, everyone.
We'll talk again. Thank you.